Stutthof, once a symbol of Nazi brutality, became a place where death, fear, and cruelty consumed the lives of thousands. Established in 1939, it would go on to witness the horrors of execution, forced labor, and unimaginable suffering. But as the war neared its end in 1945, Stutthof's dark chapter was nearing its final, tragic moments. Stutthof was the first Nazi concentration camp established outside of Germany's pre-war borders. It officially began operation on September 2, 1939, just one day after Germany's invasion of Poland. The camp was located near the village of Stutthof, formerly known as Stutthof, situated approximately 34 kilometers east of Gdansk, then the Free City of Danzig, a semi-autonomous territory under the League of Nations protection. The Nazis annexed this area almost immediately after invading Poland. The camp was initially set up in a former civilian brickyard surrounded by barbed wire and guarded by the SS. It wasn't originally part of the formal concentration camp system run by the SS Totenkampfverbände. Instead, it began under the Danzig Police Authority. But in November 1941, it was incorporated into the Nazi concentration camp system under the direct control of the SS Main Economic and Administrative Office, and became an official SS concentration camp in January 1942. Originally, Stutthof was used to imprison Polish intellectuals and community leaders, teachers, priests, judges, military veterans, and resistance members. The Nazis aimed to destroy the Polish leadership class through a policy known as Intelligenzaktion. In the first few weeks alone, more than 1,500 Poles were arrested and sent to the camp. As the war progressed, the camp grew far beyond its original size. In 1942, the Nazis began expanding Stutthof significantly. The site eventually grew to include over 100 subcamps scattered across northern Poland and the Baltic region. These subcamps supplied forced labor to German companies, including DAW, Deutsche Abrüstungswerke, and private firms like Steyr Focke-Wulf, aircraft manufacturing, and Schichau-Werke shipbuilding. Stutthof also became a final destination for Jews as part of Operation Reinhard. The Nazi plan to exterminate Jews in the general government occupied Poland. By 1944, as the Eastern Front moved closer and the Nazis began evacuating other camps, tens of thousands of Jews from Auschwitz, Majdanek, and camps in the Baltics were transferred to Stutthof, overwhelming its already horrific conditions. The first mass execution at Stutthof took place on January 11, 1940. On that day, 89 Polish prisoners were taken from the camp and shot in a nearby forest. These victims weren't random. They were specifically targeted members of the Polish intelligentsia and leadership class. The group included teachers, Catholic priests, railway employees, civil servants, and businessmen, individuals who held influence in their communities. The massacre was part of a broader Nazi campaign known as Intelligenzaktion, which was aimed to destroy the Polish leadership and educated elite to prevent any organized resistance. In the first months of the occupation of Poland, an estimated 60,000 Polish intellectuals and leaders were executed across the country as part of this policy. At Stutthof, these early killings were conducted secretly. Victims were taken under the pretense of being transferred or questioned. They were often called out during evening roll calls, escorted away by SS guards, and never returned. Other prisoners learned to fear these selections. They knew that once someone's name was called during these roll calls, that person was likely facing execution. One of the earliest and most direct methods of execution was lethal injection. SS doctors and camp personnel injected a chemical called phenol directly into the hearts of prisoners. It caused immediate cardiac arrest. These executions were often carried out in the infirmary under the false pretense of treatment. Victims were mostly the sick, elderly, or children, especially during the last years of the camp's operation. It's estimated that several thousand people, including Jewish children, were killed this way. Another horrific method was drowning in muddy swamps near the camp. Guards would drag selected prisoners to marshy areas and force their heads underwater until they suffocated. This method was used primarily as a form of punishment and humiliation, often targeting women. Survivors reported that SS guards forced other inmates to watch, increasing the psychological trauma. Beatings were also a regular form of execution. Prisoners were sometimes beaten to death using clubs, rifle butts, or even shovels. In some cases, prisoners were ordered to beat fellow inmates to death, creating an atmosphere of fear and distrust. Public beatings were used as a warning to others, often following minor infractions or fabricated accusations. The most industrial form of killing began in June 1944, when a gas chamber was constructed at Stutthof. It was a small brick building located near the camp's crematorium. There, the Nazis used Zyklon B, a cyanide-based pesticide also used in Auschwitz. The gas chamber was used mainly to kill Jews who had arrived in large transports from places like Hungary, Lithuania, and the Łódź ghetto. Many victims were women, children, and the elderly, considered unfit for forced labor. Estimates suggest that at least 4,000 people were murdered in the Stutthof gas chamber. The camp also had a crematorium, built to dispose of bodies efficiently. Initially, corpses were buried in mass graves, but as the number of dead rose, cremation became the primary method of disposal. The crematorium operated constantly, especially from 1944 onward, when the camp population swelled with new arrivals. Prisoners reported that the smell of burning flesh hung in the air, and thick, greasy smoke could be seen for miles, especially on windy days. Sometimes bodies were burned in open-air pits, especially when the crematorium couldn't keep up with the volume of deaths. These mass burnings became more common in the final months of the war as the Nazis attempted to destroy evidence of mass murder. Beyond physical methods of killing, Stutthof also relied heavily on deliberate neglect. Starvation, untreated disease, exposure to harsh weather, and overcrowding were daily realities. Food rations were so low that many prisoners died of hunger or collapsed from exhaustion during forced labor. In the final phase of the war, the SS increased its use of public executions inside the camp. Hangings were carried out in front of the entire camp population. Prisoners were forced to gather and watch as fellow inmates were led to makeshift gallows. The condemned were often beaten before the execution. Some were made to stand on stools that were kicked away, while others were hoisted using ropes from wooden beams or trucks. In some cases, the SS made other prisoners assist in the executions, further dehumanizing the camp population and spreading fear. One of the most disturbing hangings occurred in October 1944, when several female Jewish prisoners were publicly hanged after being accused of organizing resistance efforts. Survivors reported that the SS forced other women to stand nearby during the execution and warned them they would be next if they stepped out of line. While male SS guards made up the majority at Nazi camps, Stutthof had a significant number of female guards, officially known as the Aufseherinnen, female overseers. These women were trained at the nearby SS training camp at Travniki, and later at Ravensbrück before being sent to Stutthof. By 1944, as the camp system expanded and more prisoners arrived, over 30 female guards served at Stutthof and its subcamps. Many of them became known for their extreme cruelty. Jenny Wanda Barkman was one of them, nicknamed the Beautiful Spectre, or sometimes the Beautiful Beast. Barkman was assigned to Stutthof in 1944 at around age 22. Despite her youth and appearance, survivors remembered her as ruthless. She reportedly selected women and children for the gas chambers, often while laughing or making cruel remarks. Witnesses claimed she beat prisoners with whips and kicked sick inmates as they lay on the ground. She was especially brutal during prisoner roll calls, where she often identified targets for execution or for punishment. Another female overseer at Stutthof, Wanda Klaff, was born in 1922 and joined the camp staff in 1944. She had previously worked in a jam factory and had no prior military background. Despite that, she quickly gained a reputation for vicious beatings and abusing sick and elderly prisoners. Similarly, Gerda Steinhoff, at just 23 years old, became one of the most feared female guards at Stutthof. Known for her enthusiasm in carrying out selections for the gas chambers, Stutthof would sometimes volunteer for these duties. She had previously worked as a housemaid and baker before joining the SS as an overseer. Prisoners reported that she enjoyed watching executions and participated in torturing inmates. Ellie Ertz, too, was among the women who participated in selections, beatings, and roll call punishments. Survivors described her as cold and indifferent, yet capable of sudden outbursts of violence. These women were not exceptions. They were part of a broader trend. About 500 female guards served in the Nazi concentration camp system, and a notable number became active participants in mass murder. Their presence at Stutthof shattered any illusions that women were less capable of cruelty. In fact, many survivors said that the female guards were often more vicious than the men, hiding their brutality behind a mask of normalcy. Now that the evidence was becoming hard to hide, Nazis used a plan which didn't end well. In January 1945, as Soviet forces advanced towards East Prussia, the Nazis began evacuating Stutthof concentration camp to prevent prisoners from being liberated. Camp officials forced around 56,000 prisoners to leave the camp and march westward under horrific conditions. These evacuations became known as the Stutthof Death Marches, one of the last mass atrocities committed by the Nazis before their defeat. The marches began on January 25, 1945, in the dead of winter. Prisoners, many already weak from starvation, disease, and hard labor, were forced to walk dozens of kilometers a day in sub-zero temperatures. They were given almost no food or water, and many wore only thin camp uniforms with inadequate shoes. Anyone who slowed down, collapsed, or tried to escape was shot on the spot by SS guards. Bodies were often left in ditches or by the roadside, where they quickly froze in the snow. Eyewitness accounts described the horror of these marches, frostbitten limbs, prisoners eating snow to stay hydrated, and the constant fear of being executed for falling behind. In some cases, guards used sticks or rifle butts to keep the prisoners moving. The death rate was staggering. It's estimated that more than 25,000 people died during or shortly after these marches, either from exhaustion, hypothermia, or being deliberately killed by the guards. Some groups of prisoners were forced to march for over 100 kilometers. Others were herded into makeshift camps or open fields with no shelter. Along the Baltic coast, some prisoners were packed onto barges or boats in hopes of transporting them further west. But many of these vessels were bombed by the Allies or sank, leading to even more deaths. When Soviet troops entered the camp just days before Germany's official surrender on May 8, 1945, they were horrified by what they found. The barracks and crematorium were still standing, bearing the weight of the atrocities committed there. The few remaining prisoners were found in a state of extreme exhaustion, with little food or medical care available. The Soviets immediately began providing aid, offering food and water to the survivors, and starting the process of treating their wounds, though many had little chance of survival due to their weakened state. Stutthof's liberation was a bitter moment. While the survivors were freed from the unimaginable horrors of the camp, they were faced with the traumatic aftermath of what they had endured. Many had lost family members, and most had been subjected to the brutal experiments, hard labor, and constant violence the Nazis had inflicted on them. In some cases, survivors were unable to comprehend that the war had ended, having endured so much suffering that the reality of freedom seemed almost incomprehensible. The camp itself had been a major site of Nazi brutality, and its liberation did not immediately bring relief to the surrounding area. Soviet troops and local residents were often forced to confront the reality of what had taken place, as mass graves and evidence of the horrific treatment of prisoners became apparent. As Soviet forces moved in, they began to dismantle the remnants of the Nazi infrastructure and began a long process of documenting the crimes at the camp. But many of those responsible for the atrocities at Stutthof were either dead or in hiding, making it difficult to immediately bring perpetrators to justice. However, the Polish government, under Soviet influence, organized a series of trials to prosecute those responsible for the crimes committed at Stutthof. These proceedings became some of the earliest post-war war crimes trials in Europe. The first trial took place from April 25th to May 31st, 1946, at a special criminal court in Gdansk. A total of 30 former staff members of Stutthof were tried, including 5 female guards: Jenny van der Barkman, Gerda Steinhoff, Van de Klaaf, Eva Paradis, and Elizabeth Becker, and 25 male staff members including capos, SS guards, and administrators. They were charged with war crimes, crimes against humanity, and participation in the mass murder of civilians, including Jews, Poles, and Soviet POWs. 11 defendants were sentenced to death by hanging. This included the 5 female guards listed above, who were publicly executed on July 4, 1946, in Biskupia Gorka, a hill in Gdansk. The execution was witnessed by thousands of Polish civilians. 18 others received prison sentences ranging from 5 years to life imprisonment. One person was acquitted due to insufficient evidence of direct involvement in killings. A second trial took place in 1947, again in Gdansk. This time, 24 more former personnel were brought to court, mostly capos, SS men, and administrative workers. Many of them had served in Stutthof satellite camps, such as those in Gdynia or Elbląg. Several were found guilty of organizing transports to gas chambers, executions by gunfire, and administering lethal injections. Others were convicted for acts of torture and sadistic beatings. Sentences ranged from death to long-term imprisonment. After the immediate post-war years, further trials became rare as Cold War politics shifted priorities. However, a few notable prosecutions occurred decades later. In 2017, a former SS guard named Bruno Day, age 93 at the time of his trial, was charged in Germany for being an accessory to the murder of 5,230 people at Stutthof between 1944 and 1945. He was sentenced in 2020 to 2 years probation due to his age and health. Another case involved Johann Rehbogen, also in his 90s, who stood trial in 2018 in Germany for serving as an SS guard at Stutthof. His trial was eventually dropped for medical reasons. In total, over 80 individuals associated with Stutthof were prosecuted across Poland and Germany. Dozens were found guilty of war crimes and crimes against humanity. Many lower-ranking personnel escaped justice due to lack of evidence, anonymity, or fleeing abroad. These trials were among the earliest examples of holding concentration camp personnel accountable, including female guards, which had rarely been done before. The Stutthof proceedings helped set legal precedents for how following orders, or being a low-ranking guard, was not an acceptable defense for crimes of genocide. Irmgard Fürstner was one of the final individuals held legally responsible for crimes committed at a Nazi concentration camp. Her case made global headlines, not only because of her age, but because it marked the closing chapter in decades of post-war justice. Fürstner worked as a civilian typist and secretary in the commandant's office at the Stutthof concentration camp from June 1943 until April 1945. She served under Paul Werner Hoppe, the camp's commandant, and was responsible for typing execution orders, handling inmate rosters and transport lists, managing daily correspondence for the SS leadership, and maintaining administrative records that tracked prisoner movements and deaths. Though she never personally killed anyone, prosecutors argued that her clerical work helped facilitate the systematic murder of over 10,500 people and the attempted murder of many more. Fürstner was indicted in 2021 by German prosecutors in Itzehoe, a town in northern Germany. Her trial began in September 2021, when she was 96 years old. Before her trial began, Fürstner briefly made headlines by attempting to flee. On the morning her trial was set to start, she left her retirement home in a taxi and went missing for several hours. She was found in Hamburg later that day and placed under temporary arrest. The trial resumed, and due to her age, it was conducted in youth court, since she had been under 21 during her time at Stutthof. Survivors from several countries testified via video, while experts presented archived documents typed or filed by Fürstner during the genocide. On December 20th, 2022, the court found Irmgard Fürstner guilty of being an accessory to the murder of those 10,505 individuals and the attempted murder of 5 others. She was given a 2-year suspended sentence, meaning she did not serve jail time due to her age, frailty, and low-level administrative role. Irmgard Furchner died in January 2025 at the age of 99. Her death closed one of the last active legal cases tied directly to Nazi-era crimes. By the time of her conviction, most perpetrators had either died or were too frail to stand trial. Today, Stutthof serves as a memorial and museum. Visitors can see the remains of the camp and learn about the horrors that took place there. The public executions, the brutal guards, and the suffering of thousands are hard to stomach. But they are stories that must be told so that such atrocities never happen again.